Called it a girls' weekend. I found a hotel keycard in the pocket of my sport coat, the one she borrowed 3 weeks earlier to pick up dry cleaning. I didn't say anything. I just set it on the kitchen counter, went downstairs to my workshop, and sat there in the quiet for a long time. That was how it started. Not with a fight, not with accusations. Just a small rectangle of plastic and a feeling in my stomach that I recognized immediately, the way you recognize the smell of smoke before you see the fire. My name is not important. What matters is this. I was 58 years old, had been married for 31 years, and on a Tuesday evening in October, I discovered that the woman I had built my entire adult life with had been lying to me for at least 2 of them. Let me back up. My wife. I'll call her my wife because that's what she was, legally and in every way I'd understood the word, was a regional sales director for a pharmaceutical distributor. Good job, good salary. She traveled maybe 6 or 7 trips a year when we first married, then gradually more as she moved up. By the time our kids were grown and out of the house, she was gone 2, sometimes 3 weekends a month. I didn't think much of it. That was her career. I respected it. I was proud of her, even. I'm a retired civil engineer, spent 30 years with the county, managed infrastructure projects, bridges mostly. Methodical work. You learn to check your measurements twice and trust what the numbers tell you. I should have trusted the numbers sooner. About 8 months before the hotel keycard, I noticed a charge on our joint visa that I didn't recognize. Not a large one. $340 at a resort in Scottsdale. I figured it was a work dinner. I didn't ask. A few weeks later, another one. A spa charge, $119, at a hotel in Denver. I mentioned it over dinner, and she said her company had reimbursed her, but the personal card had been charged by mistake. The reimbursement would come back as a direct deposit. Made sense. I let it go. But I'm an engineer. And engineers, when something doesn't quite add up, tend to write it down. I started keeping a small notebook. Not because I was suspicious in any dramatic way, more because something in the back of my mind was running calculations and coming up short. I logged the charges I couldn't immediately explain, the weekends where her itinerary seemed vague, the times she said she was in one city, and I noticed she'd called me from an area code that didn't match. By month 4, I had 11 entries. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I went back through 18 months of our joint account statements. She handled the bills. I handled the investments. That had been our arrangement for years. And I started cross-referencing. What I found didn't make me angry at first. It made me sad in a way that's hard to describe. The kind of sad that settles into your chest quietly, like sediment. Over 22 months, roughly $47,000 had moved out of our joint savings in increments that each individually looked unremarkable. Transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Not her personal checking. She had one of those, we both did. Private spending money was normal for us. This was a different account number entirely. A third account. I called our financial advisor, a man I'd known for 15 years who managed our retirement portfolio. I told him I was updating some account records and asked if he'd ever seen that account number associated with our household. He had not. I hired a private investigator. I want to be honest about that because some people, when they hear it, think it sounds dramatic or paranoid. But I had a notebook with 11 entries and $47,000 that had quietly walked out the door. That's not paranoia. That's a pattern. The investigator, a former sheriff's deputy named, just call him my investigator, was thorough and professional and delivered his first report to me on a Thursday afternoon at a Panera Bread near my house. He set a manila folder on the table between us and let me open it myself. Her name was mentioned once, in reference to a man named Trent. No last name in the first report, just Trent. He was, according to what my investigator had put together in 3 weeks, a commercial real estate developer, based in Phoenix, 52 years old, divorced twice. I sat with that folder for a while. I drank my coffee. I drove home. I didn't say anything to my wife that evening. She made pasta. We watched the news. I went to bed before she did, and lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, running through every year of our marriage, the way you might walk through a house you're about to sell, checking each room one last time, 31 years. Our daughter had been born in year 3, our son in year 7. We'd lost my father-in-law together. We'd renovated this kitchen together, argued about cabinet colors, laughed about it later. We'd held each other at my mother's funeral. All of it, all 31 years of it. And somewhere in the last 2, she had opened a third account and started funneling money toward a man named Trent. I asked my investigator to keep going. Over the next 6 weeks, the picture got clearer. Trent wasn't just a man she was seeing. He was a man she was financing. That $47,000 hadn't gone to dinners or hotel rooms. It had gone, in several installments, toward what appeared to be a cash injection into one of his development projects. A mixed-use property in Tempe that was behind on its construction financing. My wife wasn't just having an affair, she was subsidizing one. The investigator found 41 documented instances of contact over approximately 26 months. Some were business trips she'd genuinely taken, extended by a day or 2 on either end. Some were girls' weekends with friends who, when the investigator checked, had no knowledge of a trip being planned. The hotel keycard I'd found was from a Marriott in Scottsdale. She'd been there with Trent 4 weeks earlier. She'd borrowed my jacket to pick up dry cleaning 2 days after she got home and apparently forgotten to check the pockets. 41 times. I did the math. That's almost 2 years of sustained, deliberate effort. Planning. Lying. Not a mistake. Not a moment of weakness. A sustained, organized, parallel life. Here is what I want to say about that period. The 6 weeks I spent finding all of this out, I did not fall apart. I want to be clear about that. Not because I'm trying to seem strong, but because I think the assumption is that a man finding this out would break down or get furious or do something reckless. I didn't. I went to my workshop in the evenings. I worked on a chair I'd been building for 2 years, a Windsor chair, the kind with the spindle back. Slow work. Patient work. I sanded and fit and sanded again, and I let myself feel whatever I felt without acting on it. What I felt, mostly, was grief, and underneath the grief, something quieter and more methodical, a certainty that when I moved, I needed to move correctly. I called a divorce attorney. She came recommended by a colleague at my son's, a woman who specialized in high-asset cases. I want to mention the asset part because this matters. My wife and I had built significant savings over 31 years. The house, 2 retirement accounts, an investment portfolio, a vacation property in the Smokies we'd been renting out for supplemental income. Combined, close to $1.4 million in marital assets. The attorney reviewed everything I brought, the account statements, the investigator's report, the documented transfers, and she was quiet for a moment before she looked up and said, "This is a strong case." I asked her what that meant for next steps. She explained that in our state, financial misconduct in a marriage, specifically diverting marital funds to a third party, particularly a romantic partner, is what's called dissipation of marital assets. It doesn't automatically change the divorce settlement, but it's admissible, it's documented, and it gives us significant leverage. She used the word leverage, and I wrote it down. I went home. I kept having dinner with my wife. I kept watching the news. I kept going to sleep in the same bed. I know that sounds strange. People ask how I did it. Honestly, it helped that I had a plan. When you know what comes next, the waiting becomes manageable. I'd spent a career on long projects. You don't build a bridge by losing your temper at the timeline. Now, here is the part people always want to know about. My wife had a quarterly regional sales conference. It was scheduled for a Friday in November, about 90 miles away in a city I'll call Riverside because that's close enough without being exact. She would be driving up Thursday evening, she said, and coming back Saturday afternoon. She showed me the conference agenda on her phone. Real conference. Real company event. I confirmed it independently. What she didn't tell me was that she'd booked a room at a boutique hotel across town from the conference venue, not at the hotel block where the rest of her colleagues were staying. And what she didn't know was that my investigator had followed her there Thursday evening and confirmed that Trent had checked into the same boutique hotel approximately 40 minutes after she did. I wasn't there Thursday, I was there Friday. My son, who by this point knew something was wrong. I hadn't told him everything, only that I was dealing with a difficult situation and might need him to be available. Drove me up Friday morning. We had breakfast at a diner near the highway, and I told him, for the first time, the full scope of what I'd found. He didn't say much for a while. He's like me in that way. He just listened, and then he ordered more coffee, and then he said, "What do you need me to do?" I told him I needed him to be there. We went to the hotel restaurant at lunchtime. It was a Friday. The place was maybe half full. My son sat with me at a small table near the window. We ordered sandwiches. I had my phone on the table. 20 minutes later, she walked in with Trent. I had never seen him before in person. He was taller than I expected. They sat 3 tables away from us, close enough that I could hear them laugh at something, and my wife reached across the table and touched his hand. I picked up my phone. I opened the camera. I took 3 photographs. Then I sent her a text message. I wrote, "Hope the conference is going well. Looks productive." And I attached one of the photographs. We watched it happen in real time. She was mid-sentence when her phone lit up on the table. She picked it up the way you do when you're half distracted, and then she went completely still. I watched her read the message. I watched her look at the photograph. I watched her head come up slowly and start scanning the room. When her eyes found me, I raised my coffee cup. She said something to Trent that I couldn't hear. She stood up. Trent turned and looked in my direction. I looked back at him for a moment, and then I turned to my son and said, "Ready." We left. We were in the car before she made it to the lobby. She called 3 times on the drive home. I didn't answer. My son drove, and I sat in the passenger seat watching the highway and feeling, for the first time in 8 months, like I could breathe. She was home when we arrived. I want to describe what happened next carefully, because it matters. She was in the living room. She had been crying. When I walked in, she started talking immediately. Explanations, justifications, the whole architecture of it, how it had started, how she hadn't meant for it to become what it became, how Trent had been struggling financially and she had just wanted to help, how she still loved me. I stood in the doorway, and I let her talk for a while. Then I said, "I know about the account." She stopped. "The 3rd account," I said. "I know about the transfers. All $47,000 of them." She sat down. "I know about the 41 trips," I said. "I know about the 41 trips," I said. "I know about Tempe. I know about the construction financing. I have documentation on all of it." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, very quietly, she asked, "How long have you known?" I told her 6 weeks. Her face did something complicated that I'm not going to try to describe. Then she asked if there was any way at all, that we could work through this. I thought about 31 years. I thought about the cabinet colors we'd argued about. I thought about my mother's funeral. I thought about the notebook in my workshop with 11 entries, and the way I'd felt driving home from Panera Bread with that manila folder on the passenger seat. "No," I said, "I don't think so." I'd already moved my portion of our retirement accounts to a separate institution, as the attorney had advised. I had already had the vacation property appraised. I had already done what needed to be done, quietly and correctly, before the conversation even started. She moved into the guest room that night. I want to talk about the financial piece separately because I think it's important and I don't see people discuss it honestly enough. Dissipation of marital assets is serious. Our attorney filed the motion to have the $47,000 treated as an advance against my wife's share of the marital estate, meaning it would be deducted from what she received in the settlement. The documentation I had was clean. Every transfer, time-stamped and sourced. The judge agreed with our motion. In the final settlement, I kept the house, the investment portfolio, and a proportionate share of retirement assets that accounted for what had been diverted. My wife received the vacation property and her remaining retirement accounts, reduced by the dissipation finding. It was not a punishment, legally speaking. It was an accounting. The numbers, as they tend to, told the truth. Trent, for what it's worth, did not come out of this well either. The development project in Tempe that my wife had partially funded went sideways 6 months after our divorce was finalized. I read about it in a business publication. Nothing dramatic, just a brief note about a project that had lost its financing and been transferred to a receiver. His name was in there. I felt very little when I read it. Our daughter called me about a month after the separation and said she didn't entirely understand what had happened, but that she loved me and was there if I needed her. I told her I appreciated that. I told her I was okay, and I meant it. Our son had been there. He understood. My wife and I didn't speak much during the 9 months it took to finalize everything. When we did, it was through attorneys, or in brief, civil exchanges about logistics. I don't carry anger toward her now. What I carry is more like a recalibration, a sense that the version of my life I thought I understood was not accurate, and that the accurate version, once I had it, required a different set of decisions. I am 59 now. The Windsor chair is finished. It sits in my workshop, and I don't use it for anything particular. I just look at it sometimes, at the joints in the spindle back, at the work of patient hands over a long time. Last spring, my neighbor's daughter introduced me to a woman she knew from her book club. We had coffee. She lost her husband 4 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. She's been figuring out who she is on the other side of that. We talk easily. We have dinner sometimes. Nothing dramatic. Just two people in their late 50s sitting across a table being honest with each other. That part still surprises me, how good honest feels. I don't know if I would have done anything differently looking back. I might have looked at the numbers sooner. I might have asked more questions when the charges first appeared. But I also know that you can't force yourself to suspect something your whole life has told you not to expect. What I know is this: when the evidence was there, I read it. When I had a plan, I followed it. When the moment came, I raised my coffee cup, and then I went home, did something with my hands, and waited for whatever came next. I think about that hotel key card sometimes, how small it was, how ordinary. A white rectangle with a magnetic strip, the kind you forget in your pocket without thinking twice. My wife forgot it. And that small, ordinary thing started unraveling 2 years of carefully constructed lies. That's usually how it goes. Not a dramatic confession, not a sudden catastrophe. Just a detail that doesn't fit, sitting quietly in a jacket pocket, waiting. What I've come to understand, not as a lesson I read somewhere, but as something I lived, is that the choices we make don't disappear. They accumulate. Every transfer my wife made to that third account, every weekend she invented, every time she looked across the dinner table and said nothing, those choices were building something. She just didn't know I was building something too. I was methodical about it. Some people might call that cold. I call it the only way I knew how to survive it with my integrity intact. Because the moment I lost my composure, the moment I flipped a table or made accusations I couldn't prove, I would have handed over the only thing I still had full control of, how I handled myself. I wasn't willing to do that. Not after 31 years. Not after everything. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't come from being book smart. It comes from learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, to separate what you feel from what you do. I felt devastated. I felt grief that I still don't have the right words for, but I also understood that devastation and grief are not a strategy. So I went to my workshop. I sanded wood. I let the feelings move through me without letting them steer, and I kept my notebook. That notebook was, in some ways, the most important thing I did, not because it built a legal case, though it did, but because it kept me honest with myself. Every entry was a small act of courage. Each one was me refusing to look away from something I didn't want to be true. That kind of honesty, the kind you practice alone at a workbench at 10 o'clock at night, is harder than any confrontation. Trent is somewhere in Phoenix now, I imagine, moving on to the next thing. My wife is living the consequences of choices she made when she thought no one was paying attention. And I'm 59, sitting across dinner tables from someone who tells me the truth, and realizing that the simple act of being told the truth feels like a gift I didn't know I'd been missing. I don't think life punishes dishonesty because the universe is keeping score. I think it punishes dishonesty because dishonesty requires maintenance. You have to keep lying to cover the last lie. You have to keep the third account, keep the fake itineraries, keep the story straight. That's an enormous amount of energy to spend, and eventually the maintenance cost exceeds what the whole thing was ever worth. Honesty is just less expensive, in every sense of the word. If I could say anything to someone sitting where I sat 8 months before that restaurant, noticing the small things, feeling the numbers not add up, telling themselves maybe it's nothing, I'd say this: trust what you see, not what you fear, not what you hope, but what the evidence in front of you actually says. And then be patient, be disciplined, move correctly when the time comes. The Windsor chair in my workshop has sat there long enough now that it's starting to look like it was always there. That's what good work does eventually. It stops looking like effort and starts looking like it belongs. I think I'm getting there too.